You know what fascinates me about early retirement? It's not just the numbers. It's not even the strategy. It's that one of the most important decisions you'll ever make doesn't feel like a decision at all until suddenly it is. One day you're 35, telling yourself you'll figure it out later. The next day you're 55, and the gap between you and the person retiring this year feels impossibly wide. But here's the thing. That gap isn't always what you think it is. It's not always about income. It's not always about luck. Sometimes the person retiring at 55 made less than the person still grinding away at 68. Let that sink in. So what actually separates these two groups? What makes one person hang up their work badge at 55 while another keeps clocking in until 70? The answer isn't what most financial gurus tell you. It's quieter, it's more personal, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Let me tell you about two people I've gotten to know over the years. Carol worked as a school nurse for 32 years in a small town outside of Cleveland. She made decent money, but never anything extraordinary. Her highest salary year was around $72,000. She lives in a paid-off ranch home she bought back in 1994. Then there's Nancy. Nancy worked as a regional sales manager for a tech company. She earned well over six figures for the last 15 years of her career. She drove nice cars, took good vacations, lived in a beautiful four-bedroom house in the suburbs. By every external measure, Nancy was winning. Carol retired at 56. Nancy is now 69 and still working 3 days a week. She tells her friends it's because she enjoys staying busy. But when you sit down with her over coffee, the truth comes out. She doesn't feel safe stopping. Not ever. How does this happen? How does the school nurse beat the regional manager to the finish line? This is what we're going to unpack today. Because once you understand the answer, you'll start seeing your own retirement through a completely different lens. And that shift might change everything. By the way, if you're finding this helpful, the subscribe button lives right down there. Now let's get into it. The first thing that separates early retirees from everyone else is something almost nobody talks about. It's not income. It's not investment returns. It's the gap between what you earn and what you spend. That's the whole game in one sentence. Carol lived on about $38,000 a year for most of her career. The rest she saved or used to pay down her mortgage faster. Nancy lived on about $140,000 a year. She saved too, sure, but her lifestyle expanded as her income grew. Every raise turned into a bigger house, a nicer car, a more expensive zip code. Here's a question. If you had to choose between more money or more certainty, which would it be? Keep that in your head as we go, because this single question is at the heart of every retirement decision. And most people answer it without realizing they're answering it. Think of it this way. Your income floor is like the foundation of your house. Strong, underground, invisible, but holding everything up. Your savings? That's more like the furniture. Furniture makes life comfortable. But furniture doesn't keep the roof from caving in. The foundation does that. Carol built a strong foundation by keeping her expenses small. She didn't need $1 million to retire because she didn't need $1 million lifestyle. Her annual expenses were around $26,000 by the time she stopped working. Her Social Security and pension combined gave her almost $32,000. She had a surplus before she even touched her savings. Nancy needed about $110,000 a year just to keep her current life going. Her Social Security would pay about $36,000. She had $840,000 saved. But that gap between her income and her expenses, it scared her into working longer, and it should. The real question isn't how much you've saved. It's how big the gap is between your income and your expenses. That's the question that decides when you can retire. Not how much you have, not how much you earn. The gap, always the gap. Now here's where it gets interesting. There's a quiet force that erodes that gap year after year, and most people don't take it seriously until it's already done its damage. Inflation, it doesn't scream, it doesn't show up as a single bad event, it just creeps along, raising the cost of everything around you while your dollars sit still. Inflation is like an ice cube in the sun. It doesn't melt all at once. It creeps, it nudges, it slowly raises the cost of everything. Your groceries, your insurance, your health care. $20 today doesn't buy what $20 bought 5 years ago, and $20 5 years from now will buy even less. This is why people who retire at 55 plan differently than people who panic at 65. They build inflation into their thinking from day one. They calculate what those expenses will look like in 15, 20, 25 years. Because if you retire at 55, you might be retired for 40 years. That's a long time for an ice cube to melt. Carol thought about inflation constantly. She kept some of her savings in growth investments even into her 60s because she knew her money needed to keep working. Nancy stayed too conservative too soon. She moved everything into safe accounts at 60, watching her purchasing power quietly erode while she felt responsible for being cautious. The second thing that separates early retirees is their relationship with debt. And I don't just mean credit card debt, I mean all of it. The car payment, the mortgage, the home equity line, the thing financed at 0% that doesn't really cost anything, right? Every dollar of debt you carry into your 50s is a chain on your ankle. Every monthly payment is a piece of your future income already promised to somebody else. The early retirees figured this out early. They attacked their debt with the same intensity most people use to chase raises. Carol paid off her house at 52. Her car was a 2009 Toyota with 200,000 miles on it that ran like new. She had no credit card balance, no medical debt, nothing. When she walked away from her job at 56, no one was waiting on a check from her except the utility company and the property tax office. Nancy still has a mortgage. Not a small one either. About $310,000 still owed on a house worth $600,000. Her monthly payment alone eats up a huge chunk of what her retirement income would be. And every time she considers retiring, that number stares back at her. What do you think? Are most people actually behind on retirement, or are they measuring it wrong? Nancy isn't behind in any traditional sense. She has more saved than the average American her age, but her expenses are so high that her savings feel small. Carol has less saved, but feels rich. Same country, same economy, completely different reality. The third separator is how each person thinks about Social Security. And this one is huge. Most people treat Social Security as an afterthought, something that just shows up whenever they file for it. The early retirees treat it like the most important financial decision of their lives, because in many ways, it is. Think of Social Security not as an endpoint, but as a safety net, one you paid into your whole life. But the size of that net depends on when you decide to use it. Take it too early, and you lock in a smaller check forever. Wait too long, and you miss years of income you could have used. Here's what most people don't understand. If you claim Social Security at 62, you get a permanently reduced benefit, about 30% less than you'd get at your full retirement age. But if you wait until 70, your benefit grows by about 8% every year you delay past full retirement age. That's a guaranteed return you can't get anywhere else. Carol claimed at 66. She had the pension and her savings to bridge the years between 56 and 66. She didn't need the money early, so she let it grow. Today, her Social Security check is about $2,300 a month. Combined with her pension, she has nearly $4,000 of guaranteed income coming in every single month. Nancy is still working partly because she's afraid to claim early. She wants the bigger check at 70, but she doesn't have enough savings to bridge to 70 without serious stress. She got stuck in the middle. Too much lifestyle to retire early. Too few guaranteed dollars to feel safe waiting. The question isn't what's the best age, it's what's the best decision for your life right now. For Carol, claiming at 66 was perfect. For Nancy, neither 62 nor 70 feels right because her foundation was never built strong enough. The Social Security decision is a symptom, not the disease. Quick pause. If you're new here, hit subscribe. I've got a lot more of these waiting for you. Now let's talk about something that gets ignored constantly, the big number myth. You've heard it before. You need $1 million to retire. You need $1.5 million. You need $2 million. The numbers keep climbing. And every time you see another article, you feel a little further behind. Here's the truth. The overwhelming majority of retirees in America have nowhere near $1 million. The median retirement account balance for households nearing retirement is around $200,000, not $2 million, not even $1 million, $200,000. And yet most of those people are okay. Not rich, but okay. How? Because that big number was never the real target. The real target is monthly income. If you have enough coming in every month to cover your expenses with a little cushion, you've retired successfully. It doesn't matter if you have $800,000 or $80,000 sitting in an account. Carol's net worth, including her paid-off house, is about $400,000. By internet retirement standards, she should be terrified. She's not. She sleeps well at night. She takes road trips. She helps her grandkids with their school books. She's lived this way long enough to know it works. Nancy's net worth, including her house equity, is well over $1 million. By internet standards, she's a success story. She's stressed. She checks her accounts compulsively. She runs spreadsheets at the kitchen table at 11 p.m. She is, by every emotional measure, poorer than Carol. It's not about who has more saved. It's about who has more certainty. Read that again. Because once it clicks, you start to see retirement differently. The goal isn't accumulation for its own sake. The goal is income that supports your life with confidence. The fourth separator is what I call expense honesty. Most people lie to themselves about what they actually spend. Not on purpose, they just guess. They think their grocery bill is $600 a month when it's really $850. They forget about the Netflix, the Hulu, the Spotify, the gym, the car maintenance, the property taxes, the random Amazon purchases. The early retirees track every single dollar for at least a year before they make the leap. They know exactly what their life costs, not what they think it costs, what it actually costs. That real number is the foundation of every decision they make. Carol tracked her expenses for 3 full years before retiring. 3 years. She knew exactly what her water bill was, what her car insurance ran, what she spent on groceries, what she spent on birthday gifts for her grandkids. She built her retirement number around real data, not hopeful estimates. Nancy never tracked anything, not in detail. She has a vague sense that she spends about $90,000 a year, but if you actually pulled her bank statements, you'd find it's closer to $130,000. The gap between what she thinks and what's real is over $40,000 a year. That's the difference between confidence and constant anxiety. Let me ask you something. Do you know what your monthly income will actually look like when you retire? Be honest with yourself. Most people can't answer that without pulling out their phone and doing math. And that's exactly the problem. You can't plan for what you don't measure. The fifth separator is health planning. This one hurts to talk about, but it has to be said. Healthcare is the single biggest variable in retirement, and it's the one most people refuse to plan for. They assume Medicare will cover everything. It doesn't. They assume their employer's plan will last forever. It won't. The early retirees figure out healthcare before they hand in their notice. They know what marketplace plans cost in their state. They know what COBRA looks like. They have a written plan for every year between retirement and Medicare eligibility at 65. Carol's husband still worked part-time at the local hardware store, partly for the insurance coverage. That bridged her gap from 56 to Medicare. She didn't leave it to chance. They planned for it together 10 years before she retired. Nancy never planned this part. She assumed she'd handle it when the time came. Now she's stuck in a job partly because dropping it means buying her own coverage at 69, which would cost almost $20,000 a year out of pocket. The decision was made for her by her lack of planning. Then there's the sixth separator, and this one might be the most important. Lifestyle design. The early retirees know exactly what they're retiring to, not just what they're retiring from. They have a picture in their head of how they want to spend their days. Not just the first 6 months, the next 30 years. Carol knew she wanted to garden, volunteer at the library, take small road trips with her sister, and watch her grandkids grow up. Her retirement isn't about doing nothing. It's about doing what she actually wanted to do all along, but couldn't because of work. She has direction, she has rhythm. Nancy doesn't know what she'd do if she stopped working. She spent so many years climbing the ladder that the ladder became her identity. The thought of stepping off it doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like falling. So she keeps climbing, not because she needs the money as much as she's afraid of what's on the other side. I want to ask you something personal. Have you ever avoided opening your retirement statements because you were afraid of what you'd see? Most people have. And that quiet fear is the single biggest obstacle between you and a confident retirement. Because what you don't measure, you can't manage. And what you avoid only grows. Now, I want to talk about something that often gets brushed aside, the sequence of returns risk. It sounds technical, but stay with me, because it might be the most important concept you'll ever hear about retirement timing. Here's the idea. If you retire in a year when the market drops 20% and you start pulling money out of your accounts at the same time, you're locking in those losses. You're selling at the bottom. The money you withdraw can't recover when the market eventually bounces back because it's already gone. This is why retiring at 55 during a bad market year can permanently damage your plan. And it's why early retirees often build in cash buffers, 2 to 3 years of living expenses sitting in safe accounts, ready to use if the market tanks. They don't touch the investment accounts when things are bad. They wait, they let the market recover, then they refill the buffer. Carol kept about 3 years of expenses in a high-yield savings account when she retired. About $75,000 earning a little interest, but that money let her sleep at night. When the market dropped in 2022, she didn't panic. She didn't sell. She lived off her cash and her guaranteed income and waited. Nancy never built that buffer. Her money was all invested all the time. When the market dropped, she felt every percentage point in her gut. That's part of why she's still working. The thought of stopping during uncertain markets terrifies her, and there's no buffer to give her breathing room. The seventh and final separator is psychological readiness. Money is the easy part. Mindset is the hard part. The early retirees do internal work that most people skip entirely. They imagine their identity without the job. They talk to their spouse about what daily life will actually look like. They prepare emotionally, not just financially. Carol and her husband had real conversations about retirement for years. What would they do every day? Who would they see? How would they spend their mornings, their afternoons, their weekends? They didn't just plan the money, they planned the life. Nancy and her husband barely talk about it. He retired 3 years ago, and she saw his transition was rough. He didn't have anything to retire to. He just stopped working. He spent months feeling lost. That memory haunts her every time she considers stopping. The fear isn't really about money. It's about identity. Here's a question for the married folks. Have you and your spouse ever actually talked about what happens if one of you is gone? Not in a morbid way, just practically, because survivor planning is another piece most people skip. What pension survives? What Social Security check continues? What happens to the income that supported both of you? For Carol and her husband, they ran the numbers together. If he passed first, his pension would drop by half, but their housing costs would stay the same. They built a plan around that. For Nancy, none of this has been mapped out. It's another layer of uncertainty she's carrying alone, even while sitting next to her husband at dinner. So let's pull all this together. What actually separates the person who retires at 55 from the person still working at 70? It's not income, it's not luck, it's not even how much they saved. It's 7 specific things working together. The gap between income and expenses, the relationship with debt, the strategy around Social Security, honest expense tracking, real healthcare planning, lifestyle design, and psychological readiness. Master those 7 things, and the age you retire becomes a choice instead of a hope. Now let me give you some practical things you can do this month. Right now, not someday, because intention without action is just daydreaming, and daydreaming has never paid a single bill. First, track every dollar you spend for the next 60 days. Every cup of coffee, every subscription, every random purchase. Use an app, a notebook, a spreadsheet, whatever works. The goal is data, real data. By the end of those 60 days, you'll know more about your money than 90% of people your age. Second, calculate your actual gap. What's your real monthly expense number? What's your expected guaranteed income from Social Security and any pension? The difference is what your savings need to cover. If that gap is small, you're closer than you think. If it's large, now you know what to work on. Third, get clear on your Social Security numbers. Go to the Social Security website, create an account. Look at your earnings record. See what your benefit would be at 62, at full retirement age, and at 70. These 3 numbers should be the foundation of every retirement conversation you have from this point forward. Fourth, do a healthcare audit. If you retire before 65, where will your insurance come from? Get actual quotes. Look at marketplace plans in your state. Understand COBRA. Talk to your HR department. Don't guess. Get real numbers, because health expenses can derail more retirement plans than any other single factor. Fifth, have the conversation with your spouse or partner. Not just about money, about life. What do you both want your days to look like? Where do you want to live? What do you want to do? Money funds the life. The life is the point. Quick check. Do you know your full retirement age for Social Security? Most people don't. And that one number changes every other calculation you'll make about retirement. Look it up tonight. Write it down. I want to come back to Carol and Nancy for a moment, because their stories teach us something no spreadsheet can. Carol isn't rich by any measure most people would use. She drives an old car, she buys clothes at outlet stores, she doesn't take international vacations. By Nancy's standards, her life would look small. But Carol wakes up every morning without an alarm. She has coffee on her porch. She decides what her day looks like. She doesn't dread Mondays because there are no more Mondays in her life. Every day is just a day. That freedom, that peace, that quiet confidence, that's the real prize, and she paid for it not with a huge income, but with intention. Nancy will probably retire eventually. Maybe at 71, maybe 72. She has the money. She just doesn't have the certainty. And the years she's spending working now, while her body still moves freely and her grandkids are still little, those years don't come back. They quietly slip away while she's busy chasing a number her plan never required her to chase. This is the real cost most people never talk about. The cost of working too long when you didn't have to. The cost of trading years you can never get back for security you already had if you just looked closely enough. Time is the one currency you can't earn more of. Once it's spent, it's gone. No refunds, no second chances. You may already have what people with millions are searching for. Read that again. If your expenses are reasonable, if your income is steady, if your debt is small, if your plan is built on real numbers, you might already be closer to retirement than the spreadsheets suggest. The math might be more in your favor than the headlines led you to believe. That doesn't mean you should retire tomorrow without preparation. It means you should sit down with your actual numbers and find out where you really stand. Not where the internet says you should stand, not where your coworkers think they stand, where you stand. Because your retirement isn't an average. It's specific, it's personal, it's yours. You don't need perfection to have a successful retirement. You don't need to get everything exactly right. What you need is awareness, clarity, and the willingness to face the real numbers so you can make real decisions. Because when you understand your income, your expenses, and how your plan holds up over time, something changes. You feel more in control, more confident, more at ease. The difference between retiring at 55 and working until 70 isn't usually about how much money you make. It's about how clearly you see your own situation. The early retirees aren't smarter. They aren't luckier. They just paid closer attention. They built their plan on truth, not assumption. And that single difference shaped the next 30 years of their lives. If you've been carrying around a vague sense that you're behind, ask yourself where that sense actually comes from. Is it from your real numbers, or from comparing yourself to people whose numbers you don't actually know? Most retirement anxiety comes from comparison, not calculation. And comparison is almost always wrong because you're comparing your inside to someone else's outside. Carol never compared herself to Nancy. She didn't have to. She knew what her life cost. She knew what her income was. She knew her plan worked because she'd checked the math 100 times. She had no reason to look sideways at anyone else's life because hers was already lined up. Nancy has spent decades comparing to coworkers, to neighbors, to financial magazines that keep moving the goalposts. The more she compares, the more behind she feels, even though she's objectively ahead of most Americans her age. The comparison is what's stealing her peace, not the math. So stop comparing, start measuring, stop guessing, start tracking, stop assuming, start asking. The early retirees aren't doing magic. They're doing the basic work that most people skip. The work isn't hard. It's just quiet, slow, and unglamorous, which is probably why it gets ignored. If this video helped you see your retirement in a new way, hit that subscribe button. I've got a lot more where this came from. Your income needs to be greater than your expenses, but your confidence needs to be greater than your fear. Numbers matter, but how you feel about those numbers, that matters just as much. And that feeling, that confidence, it doesn't come from having more, it comes from understanding more. So this week, sit down with a notebook, write your real numbers, not the ones you wish were true, the ones that actually are. Then look at them, sit with them, let them tell you the truth about where you stand. Because once you know the truth, you can do something with it. And once you do something with it, retirement stops being a fear and starts becoming a plan. And plans, unlike fears, can actually be finished.